Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this ASPI webinar. I'm Fergus Hanson. I'm one of the two research directors at ASPI. We're joined today by a fantastic panel, and we're going to be talking about looking at where Japan is going when it comes to cybersecurity, technology, digital innovation, and energy transition. In his address last month to the National Press Club, the Japanese ambassador pointed out that formal Japan-Australia ties go back even further than federation, with the first Japanese diplomatic post established in Townsville 125 years ago. He also painted a picture of what Japan-Australia ties could look like in 15 years' time. A significant part of that is going to be collaboration and exchange in technology, be it cybersecurity or new energy sources. Like Australia, Tokyo is becoming more vocal in calling out cyber risks and threat actors. Just this year, Japan called out the CCP for malicious cyber attacks, the only country in Asia to do so. In September, the Japanese government is expected to present its new national cybersecurity strategy. At the same time, Japan is pursuing Society 5.0, Japan's national vision for a digital nation which seeks to harness technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, synthetic biology, and quantum technologies to tackle social issues including the country's aging population, pollution, productivity, and sustainable energy. This panel is going to talk through the various challenges, national security threats, but also the opportunities that many of these emerging issues bring. Joining us today is an incredibly impressive panel from Japan. We have Professor Taniguchi. He is professor at Keio University Graduate School of System Design and Management. Among many other positions, he was special advisor to the cabinet of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He has also served as counsellor in the Prime Minister's office and spent 20 years with the prominent magazine Nikkei Business. We're also joined by Dr. Harayama, Executive Director of RIKEN, Japan's leading science and technology research institute. She's also served at the Cabinet Office of Japan as an executive member of the Council for Science, Technology and Innovation, representing Japan in meetings of the G7's science and technology ministers. She's also worked as at the OECD as Deputy Director of the Directorate for Science, Technology and Industry. We're joined by longtime friend of ASPI, Matsubara-san, Chief Cybersecurity Strategist at NTT Corporation and our fellow alumnus with me of CSIS's Pacific Forum. She's previously served for nearly a decade at the Japanese Ministry of Defense, at Hitachi Systems as a cybersecurity analyst, as Cybersecurity Policy Director at Intel, and as Vice President and Public Sector Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks. Our session today is going to be a 30-minute discussion with the panelists. We'll then open it up to your questions, and please submit your questions via the platform and vote up the questions that you like the most. Now, with that, I'm going to start with some questions for our panelists. And Dr. Harayama, could I start with you? Could you describe the current state of technology and innovation in Japan and the key developments since, say, the 2000s? What does this new concept of Society 5.0 mean in practice?
Thank you for having me today. My pleasure to talk about Society 5.0 because I was one of the promoters of we implement Society 5.0 at the Abe governance. So to make short, how we are running scientific innovation policy in Japanese context, we are running based on what we call a scientific basic plan. Now we call it scientific and innovation basic plan. And it is a 5-year planning. And we started in 1996, so more than 20 years now. Back to the initial phase, it was really based on the infrastructure investments and how to consolidate our scientific and innovation power. But today we are shifting more and more to the societal challenges. So remember in 2011, we had a Tohoku area big earthquake. And based on that, we have been trying to address societal challenges to motivate scientific innovation policy. So, and now in 2015, we saw a new shift because in the era of digital transformation and other new technology, as you enumerate before, AI, IoT, and robotics, and so we see really a transforming power of all this technology, as well as impacting society as a whole. So we need to have a new thinking to implement scientific innovation policy. That's why we have created a new concept called Society 5.0. To make short, Society 5.0 is a shift from technology-driven approach into more human-centered approaches. And we will be taking advantage fully of the power of scientific innovation, in particular digital technologies. And also, we see to design the future society, not only describing technological paths, but identifying key values that we have to share together. That is sustainability, inclusiveness, openness, and diversity. And with this, we introduce Society 5.0 as a driver, guiding principle to orient scientific innovation policy for policymakers, but also vis-a-vis private sector signal to frame investment in scientific innovation, but also new actor, its ordinary citizen. We consider Society 5.0 as a tool to encourage people to think about and to take action to structure the future society. So shifting from the passive citizen into more proactive citizen to say on scientific innovation advancement. So I stop here.
Thank you so much. Taniguchi-san, could I ask you, you've been involved in some of the key strategic thinking in Japan around concepts like the free and open Indo-Pacific. Could you sort of place these developments in Japan in the broader strategic context of how Japan is thinking about its future and why it's why these concepts are coming up and how they sit in the overarching landscape?
Certainly, I'd be happy to answer those questions. You say free and open Indo-Pacific. There are two components in that word, free and open for one, and Indo-Pacific for another. It was in the early 1980s that Australia and Japan jointly launched APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. The geographic notion prevalent those days was about Asia-Pacific. Excluded from that framework were countries such as India. Now, in the 2020 years, it is India that is gaining weight yearly. And most fortunately, India is a maritime-oriented democracy. So instead of Asia Pacific, it is opportune time for us to talk about Indo-Pacific. That's what Indo-Pacific means. What about free and open? The antonym of those words there would be not free and closed. There is a country, I wouldn't name the name, that is inclined to dominating the seascape with a notion, with a willingness of challenging the accepted norms and rules. Japan, as much as Australia, has been dependent very much on the free passage of commercial fleet, free passage of people and capital and trade goods. So it is incumbent upon countries such as Japan and Australia to safeguard the rules-based, free and open seascape of the Indo-Pacific. So that's how this notion of FOIP has evolved into where it is. What's interesting is This was first discussed by the previous administrations of Japan and the United States. However, the Biden administration of the United States has chosen to cherish the idea as much as the previous administration of Donald Trump's, and Prime Minister Suga in Japan has actually followed the same path. That's where FOIP is. And one thing that I should add is that Australia and Japan have come a long, long way compared to where they were 10 years ago. The two nations have now forged the most advanced economic partnership agreement. Based upon that, we have developed and completed the TPP. So Australia and Japan are now ready to tackle broader challenges, and those challenges include maintaining that rules-based international order.
So could I just ask you one chaser question on that, on those remarks? Do you see, you said Australia and Japan have come a long way and are getting closer and closer. Do you see any significant differences in strategic thinking when it comes to, you know, the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific from a Japanese perspective versus from an Australian perspective, or a US perspective, or an Indian perspective?
Well, there may be differences, certainly. Seen from the Indian perspective, for instance, the Indian Ocean region, the IOR, that's how the Indians call the region, bears a significant importance, more so than other regions. For Australia, the uniqueness of Australia lies in the fact that it is a country of the Pacific orientation, but at the same time, Australia is a great Indian Ocean power as well. So Japan, by allying more closely with Australia and India, could learn as much as possible their views, Australians' views and Indian views of the vast stretch of the ocean. But what's important is that there is no division at all between the Pacific and the Indian Oceans. That's where the term the Indo-Pacific originated from. And Prime Minister Shinzo Abe addressed that issue back in 2007 when he addressed the Joint House of the Indian Parliament. And the speech's title spoke volumes because it was dubbed, entitled Confluence of the Two Seas. Japan's views, US views, Australians' views may be different from each other, but now is the time for those nations to think about something in common that binds these two nations together. And that's the growing importance to maintain the rules-based liberal international order.
Wonderful, thank you. Matsubara-san, maybe I could turn to you. You'd flagged in the upcoming publication of a new national cybersecurity strategy. Could you share with us what you expect the new strategy to contain, and how it will be different than previous ones? What are some of the implications for companies such as yours, NTT, and why should Australia take note of the new strategy?
Sure. So I expect 4 new aspects in the upcoming 2021 version of Japanese National Cybersecurity Strategy. Tokyo 2020 Olympics and Paralympic Games. The second, cyber attacks as part of armed attacks. And third, cybersecurity for economic security and supply chain risk management. And finally, cybersecurity for threat intelligence. So we now successfully finished the Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympic Games, and we are still having the Paralympic Games. But still, the Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo haven't seen any major disruption caused by cyber attacks. So I would expect that the 2021 version would include some success stories to share with in the industry and also with the rest of the world. And second, for the first time, 2021 version of National Cybersecurity Strategy will declare that some cyber attacks would constitute a part of armed attacks for the first time. Of course, in the past, self-defense forces and Ministry of Defense mentioned that fact in that concept in their strategies and documents. But now, because the new strategy would elevate that recognitions to the national level, so I would be certainly expect that this would make it easier for the Japanese Ministry of Defense and self-defense forces to collaborate with the international military partners such as Australians and Americans in the future. And third, the new cybersecurity strategy will mention the importance of cybersecurity for economic security and supply chain risk management. Of course, the supply chain risk management has been important all the time, but for the first time, the new concept, economic security, will be included in the new national cybersecurity strategy. And Australia will be mentioned as one of the important international cybersecurity partners in the new strategy. And Japan and Australia have been working really closely together on Quad, the free and open Indo-Pacific, and also the Blue Dot network to help the trust for infrastructure investment, such as in Pearl for the fiber optical cables in the future. So I expect that Australia and Japan can help each other even more based on the new national cybersecurity strategy. And finally, cyber threat intelligence. So for the first time, the new national cybersecurity strategy will list 3 specific state actors. Russia, China, and North Korea are the major cyber actors in the world. And also Japan would mention that Japan is really committed to enhance its cyber threat intelligence capabilities to hold somebody responsible or accountable, and also to make sure to take every possible actions to take, including political, diplomatic, and technical measures to hold them accountable. So now I think that I'm given the deeper and bigger the collaboration between Japan and Australia. Japan and the 2 countries will have more to share and more to collaborate on in terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah, wonderful. That's fantastic to hear that, and I think really encouraging that more and more states are having the confidence to call out the worst actors in this space. I want to come back to you around the issue of attributions, but first I thought I'd go to Harayama-san to look at where, because one of the attributions that Japan made was around some companies that were being targeted in Japan. So I'm wondering, whereabouts do Japan's strengths lie in research, technology, and innovation, and how do these compare, regionally, globally? And I'm also sort of interested in the extent of the collaboration with Australia. That was one thing that the ambassador highlighted in his recent address.
So if I may, it's really accelerated changes in scientific innovation, in particular focusing on digital-related technology, but not only. And also the impact of this technology, not only in that transforming into product or services in an economic way, but transforming our way of living. So that's why we have to really take reference of Society 5.0. To really see the implication on the ground, I would say Japanese companies and research institutions have been success story by the past, and now in the phase of kind of a transition phase, because we have to really transform our way of thinking, or our way of producing mass productions, but much more customer centralized, and also thinking about the well-being in the society as a whole. And also having a new system in terms of use of digital technologies. It's really, we have to think about not only implementing technology, but take care of those who have no access or thinking about digital divided. And also negative side of all this technology. Not only gaining efficiencies or productivities, but make sure that everyone is better off using this technology. So the direction is not only for even for the companies, not only increasing in terms of economic growth, but to be responsible in terms of activities, and also to seek about the implication in terms of social challenges. So it's, as I said, a transition phase. And for that, we need to have new actors coming in. And the difficulty in Japanese context is we have not strong enough to welcoming startup companies. But today we are in the need of more than ever to have new ideas coming in, challenges established companies, but also complementing established big companies. So we see some AI-oriented companies, startup companies, becoming critical partners of big companies, and that's the new way of seeking the landscape of Japanese innovation side. And for that, I would say Japan is not isolated anymore, and we need to have input from outside and also collaboration with outside. And for that, Australia is really an ideal partner in the sense that we have no time lag and we can work together in the best way. And also we have already established research institution level or company level collaboration. So we can take advantage of all these established assets to move ahead.
Thank you. Well, I might just before I come to you, Matsubara-san, I might pick up on the point around the common time zone and very easy time zone, at least, collaboration with Australia. Taniguchi-san, you'd mentioned in our remarks before we joined that there's some of the conversations you'd had around the distance, the physical distance between Japan and Australia, and how that really was irrelevant. I was just wondering if you could expand on those thoughts.
For the Japanese, Australia has never been a remote country. It is actually one of the closest countries in many ways. Australia was for a long time one single democratic nation among many developing nations with which Japan could speak freely for many years. Second, without coking coal, iron ore, natural gas, bauxite, Australia produced Japan's high growth in the 60s and 70s could not have materialized. Australia has been always one of the closest partners to Japan. However, literature in Australia tells us that there is a notion among the Australians that distance matters. Distance matters for Australia, and so much so that there is a book entitled Tyranny of Distance. Now, we're talking about cyberspace, where distance does not matter at all. And that is something that Australians and the Japanese have to come back to once again. There is not tyranny, but annihilation of distance. And the fact that Australia and Japan have been very much close for many decades enhances still further the closeness that the cyberspace has inevitably brought about. And that's a compelling reason with which the Australian scientists and Japanese counterparts must work harder still to benefit from that closeness. That's something that I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. We have lots and lots of questions coming in. It's clearly sparking a lot of thoughts from people. Please keep those questions coming. We'll be turning to them very shortly, and do vote up your fellow members' questions so we can try and have a bit of a democratic process going on here. Matsubara-san, I was going to turn to you. So just we've had these two attributions from Japan for the first time, attributing two separate malicious cyber incidents or campaigns to the CCP, including targeting a whole bunch of Japanese companies. How significant is that the government is willing to call out the CCP, both through these attributions, and you also mentioned a whole bunch of malicious actors through the strategy?
Sure. So actually, Japan had done some public attributions before this year's public attribution to China. So, for example, Japanese government condemned the North Korean cyber attack against using the WannaCry in 2017. And Japanese government also did a condemnation against Chinese APT-10 back in 2018. However, those public attribution efforts were done in alignment with the US and the US allied countries. So for the first time in the history, the Japanese government did a public attribution of cyber espionage attempts against 200 Japanese organizations, including JAXA, in April 2021 to the PLA unit 61446, and also the Chinese cyber attacker group called TIC. So this is a first and a standalone effort. And given that the new upcoming cybersecurity strategy draft already said that the Japanese government is committed to do more attribution and enhance national cyber threat intelligence capabilities. So I am certain that these two new developments from Japan would indicate that Japan is more willing to share cyber threat intelligence with the world, and also to protect Japan and also its international partners by sharing cyber threat intelligence from cyber attacks.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to questions. I'll just ask one more myself. But Taniguchi-san, I was wondering if I could ask you around the question around new energy technologies. There seems to be a real passion from Prime Minister Suga around pushing Japan in the direction of even more action in terms of climate change, reduction of emissions and transition to new technologies. One of the aspects of the relationship that the ambassador highlighted was the prospects around collaborations on emerging energy sources, particularly hydrogen. I'm just wondering how big a gap is there between Japan and Australia on climate change issues at a leadership level, and is hydrogen fuel one of those things that might be a really nice fit to bridge that gap, or if you see there as being a gap at all?
I think one has to say that it's been extremely fortunate for Japan to have Australia as among its closest partners in many respects, including energy cooperation. As indicated before, Japanese utility companies, for instance, could not have come this far without natural gas and other resources that Australia has sent to Japan. Going forward, the relationship between Australia and Japan is very much complementary, supplementary, and mutually complementary, because in the vast desert area of Australia, you could lay solar panels and produce green energy there, or you could burn your coal and retrieve the CO2 and bury that into the ground and producing hydrogen. And that hydrogen can be transformed into ammonium. And then ammonium is a material that the humankind has dealt with for centuries. So it's very much easy to ship anywhere, including Japan. I couldn't think any two bilateral relationship other than Australia-Japan that should benefit each other in the coming age of hydrogen and new sources of energy.
Great, wonderful. I don't know, Harayama-san, I know this is also your field of work. Do you have anything to add there, or should we move on to the next question?
I will say this energy and hydrogen and also, but what we would like to really promote is not only focusing on technology by se, but thinking about implementing at the society level. So we have to accompany all these technological advancement, because we have been this a lot and really requesting from private sectors. But think about having a system of systems thinking, and also to foresee what could be a negative potential impact on society. So to have a comprehensive way of promoting this technology. And also, additional point is not only from national level actions, but we have to really contribute to the SDGs in the way of globally contribution is very needed.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I'm going to turn to the questions that we're getting, and there's lots and lots of them coming through, so please continue to send them through. The most upvoted question comes from Tom Murphy, he's asked the question, what does Japan see as its key critical technologies that it needs to acquire or protect? So I'll open up to the panel. I don't know if you just want to sort of show your hands, and I can turn to you if there's anyone that wants to jump in on that. Harayama-san, yeah.
I would say, if you look at advanced countries, the top priority, you can find the same category of technology. So today it's climate change, energy issues, materials, quantum computing, AI, materials, and neurosciences. And the way is the differences between today and more than 10 years ago. We have not only technological challenges, but also we have to deal with cybersecurity in particular, but also geopolitical dimensions of advancement technology. So we need to have really thinking about how to collaborate with whom and in which way. So it's become more complex issues, not only focusing on investment technology, but how to make partnership is really at the same time so critical.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got a question. The next most voted question is from my colleague, the Deputy of the Senate, Danielle Cave. And she's asked, the Indo-Pacific has become a hotbed of technological innovation, but also strategic tech competition. And we're all watching this play out in US-China relations and in all of their relationships across the region. Where does Japan fit in all of this as a leading regional power and key technological player? So question around this strategic competition in the space of critical technologies. Do I have any?
If I could take up that question, which is a broad one indeed. what's most important for Japan, as much as for any other country, is peace and security of the nation and the people therein. And in order for Japan to secure that critical asset of peace and security, nothing can be achievable without Japan continuing to firmly ally with trusted partners, including the United States, but more increasingly Australia, India, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to a big picture of what is most important for the future, there is no alternative other than Japan to go as it has come this far. That's point number one. Point number two, Taiwan's unique relevance matters. Without me telling more, it's common knowledge Taiwan has been a dominant player in terms of producing microchips and semiconductors. And Chinese dream, quote unquote, cannot be complete without bringing back, quote unquote, again, Taiwan into China. So over the next decade, 2 decades, how long it'll take, I don't know, but that's one design that China is not willing to give up. And when it comes to the safety and peace of places such as Taiwan, again, Japan could do very little alone itself. And that's how, that's where the importance of Quad and the notion of FOIP matter most significantly.
That's great. We have quite a few questions on the Quad, actually. Maybe I could just turn to one of them. So Michelle Phillips says, what can the Quad members realistically achieve in terms of a common approach to critical technology? So could you give us any sense as well, what the Japanese official sort of thinking is around, this working group that's been stood up on critical and emerging technologies? Is it seen as sort of a starting point, it's going to grow out, or is it just the areas that it's focused on already are sort of the extent to which it can expand and be effective?
If I may briefly address that question, to be followed by 2 other members of the panel. Quad is a broad concept, nothing more, nothing less. It is a gathering among the leaders of the 4 nations. Now is the time for those leaders, Modi, Morrison, Suga, Biden, to meet as frequently as possible and to develop a habit of collaborations. So it is very much an early stage, too early for the Quad to address some of the concrete challenges, such as technology. But obviously, if you develop a habit of cooperation in many respects, it is very much important, obviously, for these 2 nations to share their knowledge, experiences, and scientific achievements to develop critical technologies that are very much important for the future of those 4 nations and beyond, including all the democratically freedom-loving nations.
Would other panel members want to jump in on that?
Sure, if I may. So I would say that the Quad members are not particularly interested in securing semiconductors, as Dr. Taniguchi already mentioned, because we are now facing the worldwide acute shortage of semiconductors. Then it has a negative impact on the manufacturing in the world. So then it is an urgent task for the Quad members to secure the supply chain of the semiconductors, not only for our industry, but also for our international security. And second, we also need to have a secure and safe 5G related technology. of course, because we will be developing something beyond 5G, so we also have to ensure that we have a safe and secure 5G and beyond in the future. But because 5G will have also related to the concept of the society for 5.0 and the internet connected devices more in the future. So cybersecurity and also IoT security will be inevitably more important to have a good and secure and trustworthy 5G security.
Dr. Harayama, yes?
If I may add, Quad is political initiative. So it's much more top-down and giving a frame for collaborations, in particular in terms of securities and economic advancement. But that's in light of Society 5.0 thinking, I will say we need to complement this approach with a more bottom-up actions to make sure that we will have some fruits from that. That means we need to explore existing collaboration among these countries at a level of research institutions or private companies in a way to consolidate these relations to make more visible, more powerful, and in line with political incentive. So we need to have these two approaches articulated.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question we've got is from Jennifer Jacket, and it's a question I think that comes up a lot in conversations that I have at the moment around export controls and protection of intellectual property. And she's asked, as a tech power, how does Japan navigate being open and supporting trade with all partners in the region and protecting sensitive critical technologies through more restrictive measures such as investment screening and export controls? How does Japan determine where to draw the line? Is there anyone that would like to take a stab at that?
Once again, if I may start, I think it's very much a relevant, highly relevant question, but I doubt if there is anyone in the world that could answer that question in a straightforward way. There are many complicated issues involved. What's clear, however, is the free-going libertarian era is behind us. Once again, policy involvement, engaging government in corporate affairs has become, like it or not, one of necessities. So Japan, Australia, the United States, and others still are committed to maintaining liberal, free trading regime. But within that framework, there must be attempts to check against those entities, companies, countries, whatever, that wish to ruin the very system that has benefited the world. Therein comes an importance of checks and balances, but where exactly can one draw a line is going to be dependent on the issues we are dealing with now and in the future.
Is there anyone else who would like to jump in on that?
If I may, I would add another dimension to this discussion about protections and IP issues. Even the concept of intellectual property is evolving through time. And today, it's any more focusing on product protections. It's moving toward more to design services, concepts, and today focus is data, how to really handle, take advantage of your data, but as always as sharing, but as well as protecting. So the weight is shifting from more on data. So we have to take account of these issues. Also, I would say in the scientific front, we see the emergence of the movement called open science. Sharing research results as soon as possible, and also sharing background data in the way to quickly advance in science. And we see the value of these open science movements with the development of vaccine for COVID-19. So we see the real value of sharing and also kind of a global commons thinking, but we feel necessity to protect ourselves in terms of national security. So how to balance all these movements, that's a critical question we have to raise today.
Great. Matsubara-san, you're happy to pass?
I can answer Ms. Jennifer Jackett's question on human capital in the cybersecurity sector.
Yes, please.
Oh, can I? Sure. So the Japanese industries is tackling with the shortage of cybersecurity talents by two means. So first, because not every single country is facing the shortage of cybersecurity professionals, and the ISC Square said that the world is short of 3 million cybersecurity professionals as of today. So if we do not collaborate between the industry, academia, and the government to make sure to produce the next generation cybersecurity pipelines, then we would expect to see the deteriorating the shortage of cybersecurity talents. So the Japanese industry, because at that time, because we are preparing for successful Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics and Paralympic Games, so NTT, NEC, and Hitachi said that, okay, so we need to work together, because this is not only the problem with one specific company or one specific country. We need to work together. So let's create a cross-sector forum to educate, hire, retain, and train cybersecurity professionals in collaboration with the government and academia. But before that, what does cybersecurity professional means? Because it can be help desk people, it can be a malware analyst, or it can be a chief information security officer. And every single types of cybersecurity professionals have a different, required to have a different types of cybersecurity skill set. So first of all, the cross-sector forum with 43 Japanese major critical infrastructure companies from all of the sectors said that, okay, so we need to define what cybersecurity professional means and what kind of skill sets are needed to fulfill their missions to protect critical infrastructure based on the NIST cybersecurity framework as a global common language. And now the cross-sector forum sponsors some cybersecurity training courses at different Japanese universities. And also the cross-sector forum has been working with the Japanese different ministerial bodies to create Japanese cybersecurity strategy over the last 6 years. And they've been also invited to speak their experiences at the NIST cybersecurity conferences in the United States. And as of today, it's surprising to know that we have no internationally recognized and internationally certified cybersecurity training syllabi. So it is one of the reasons why the cybersecurity training can cost a lot. So again, several of Japanese major companies, NEC, Hitachi, and Fujitsu said that, okay, so we really need to have internationally shareable and certified cybersecurity training therapy together. So they started that effort 4 years ago. And NTT already translated that therapy from Japanese to English, because obviously cybersecurity training effort shouldn't be just constrained within the Japanese border. We need to extend that effort beyond the border to share with the world. So as a Japanese, I'm really proud to see that effort is stemming out of Japan to share our expertise and lessons learned with the rest of the world.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to return to being democratic with my question asking, and the next most upvoted question we have is from Nick Skondrianos, who's asked, how does Japan's concept of Indo-Pacific incorporate Pacific Islands, and what is Japan doing to engage Pacific Islands on cybersecurity and critical technologies?
To be honest, I do not know now what Japan is doing specifically for the capacity building support for the Pacific Islands. But I do know that the Japanese government and industry have been helping the ASEAN countries over the last decade in terms of the capacity building at the policy level and also technical level. So the Japanese and JICA has been sponsoring the cybersecurity policy and technical workshops for the ASEAN countries. And also some Japanese major critical infrastructure companies, including NTT, has provided training for trainers and for the ASEAN countries CERT, so that ASEAN CERT can provide the same level of training for their critical infrastructure companies later.
Would anyone else like to jump on, or we can move on to the next question? All right. We've got a question from Troy Crystal, and the question is, Japan's role in strengthening cybersecurity within the Indo-Pacific would be greatly enhanced if it were to be admitted to the Five Eyes. How is Japan's 5.0 policy framework working to develop the capability and assurances required to seek this admission? Or I suppose we could put it more broadly, is there interest and work being done to drive a joining up of expanding the Five Eyes to a Six Eyes?
It's gaining interest and even appetite from among Japanese policymakers. One note of caution is the following. Five Eyes countries have developed a long tradition of exchanging personnel among each other. So Japan should start sending and accepting personnel in and out of the country with Australia, the United States, and so on. Without those personal involvement, Five Eye, Six Eye, how many eyes? I don't think it'll work as designed. Second, Japan at last passed a legislative bill, again under the initiative of the Shinzo Abe administration, to prevent sensitive intelligence from being leaked out. But that legislation is, I would say, a halfway house. Much more strict measures must be taken to really safeguard the sensitive intelligence from being leaked out. So Japan has got quite a long way to go. And before speaking about Japan's becoming a member of the Five Eyes, the foundational structure is on human beings. Maybe Japan must start sending its personnel to Canberra, to Washington, D.C., and the reverse flow has to occur as well.
Be a great initiative. Is there any other panelists wanted to jump in on that, or?
Sure. So to expand the 5 eyes to 6 eyes to include Japan, I think that it's crucial to have a good security clearance system, not only to cover government to government or male to male, military to military, but also to make sure to include an industry. Because now we have the concept called an economic security. Why? Because economy is so much integrated embedded into national security. So unless the industry really understands and can be integrated into the policy making processes and discussions, also to not only to protect supply chain risk management, but also to ensure to protect critical infrastructure, then the industry people needs to have good security clearance system to assure the government efforts.
I'm glad someone else has got a naughty dog as well. We've got maybe room for one final question from a participant called Wiga. And they've asked, how does Japan reconcile security concerns with trade policy on tech products, in particular with China? What's the cost of opening a case at the WTO through proper dispute resolution mechanisms?
Right. It's once again very much relevant and yet difficult question to answer, because I should repeat saying that the big picture is not about industry relationship. It is about security. It is about peace. So within that framework, there must be efforts from both sides, China and Japan, to maximize the economic benefits. One should not forget that there are much stakes Japanese industries have developed in China. Toyota, Nissan, Honda, you name it. So they are very much concerned and anxious about the course to be taken by China and Japan in the future. But when it comes to peace and security, there is no compromise. And I think you should not show weakness to invite even more provocations and coercion from China. So you must stay strong. And in order for you to stay strong, my point is that Japan should do as much as possible with others like Australia.
We're coming up to the hour, so I might draw things to a close here. I just wanted to thank each of our participants. Thank you so much for giving up your time from a busy day in Tokyo to join our session and speak to this virtual audience, but I assume very many coming from Australia. Thank you especially for doing a whole hour in your non-native language. We really appreciate you addressing us in English today and telling us a bit about some of Japan's plans and strategic thinking when it comes to cybersecurity and emerging and critical technology. So thank you, panel, very much for your time. Thanks to our audience for all the wonderful questions. And I'm sorry I didn't manage to get through even a small proportion of them. There were so many that came through, but clearly a lot of interest in the topic. And thank you all for generating interest and sharing your views.